Freedom is not free. Discover what it takes. It's time to tap and move forward.
Hello and welcome to Tap and Move Forward. I'm your host, Lynn Shelley. We have Lyn Christian back again. If you didn't listen to episode 29, it was a great introduction to Lyn Christian and the work she does as a coach. I am thrilled to have her back again for a second interview. As a refresher, she is a master certified coach for the International Coach Federation. Her dad was a Marine and she has done some work with the military as well. This is another Friends of the Military episode. Round 2 is an even deeper dive into important concepts like focus, adaptability, the need for a team, authentic self-discussion, vision, and developing your own planning rituals. For this week's skill set challenge, once again, pick any number of tools and tactics Lyn describes. Or as a special gift, Lyn is offering her online program to Tap and Move Forward listeners at a 50% discount. This is a fantastic way to continue your training with this master certified coach and to improve your capacity for focus. Just use TAMF as a coupon code. The link to the program is in the show notes. Without further delay, here is the interview with Lyn Christian. So Lyn Christian, it's awesome to have you back again and in such a short time frame as well. I'm really excited that this worked out.
Well, thank you.
You talked a little bit last time about reinventing, that you worked with a number of people reinventing themselves, that you've reinvented yourself. I'm curious, or I wanted to ask, that when you're in that process of reinventing, how you know if something is true for you or not, like if the desire is true for you or if it's a desire that's been imposed upon you.
So let me just clarify. We'll kind of double click and open the folder in your head that asked that question, if it's okay.
Yeah.
So reinvention and recalibration are things that I deal with personally, professionally, in my own life, but also when I'm supporting clients. It's a very unique niche because it's full of fear and great expectations and hope, aspirations. Sure. It's sort of where the intersection is between should and must, which I think is what you're honing in on. And so we have a lot of should, coulds, and ought tos that are imposed upon us. And literally, one of the ways to decide if something is for you, there are a couple of things that come to mind, top of mind. One is, you don't want to think your way into the next step. Like, you don't want to just sit and put it to your head and noodle about it, because we are like children. And like I said last time, sometimes we don't know who we are till we've gone out and tried some things and had them reflect back to us. So by playing with ideas or micro experiments, let's say somebody might be experimenting with becoming a recruit in the military, let's say. So it'd be great to go to the recruit day, talk to someone. It might be nice to interview other soldiers. It might also be great to see if you can find any kind of simulation where you can be in the trenches of what someone in the military, especially in that branch of the military, would be doing, like a day in the life of, and try to simulate that and see how you feel about it. So here's another one. I have a gentleman who's reinventing. He has a degree in psychology. He's done social work. He's worked with nonprofits. He's helped with the homeless issues in this city. And he's also a philosopher in his heart. So he's worked at a library, loves to read, goes really deep into literature and ideation and philosophy. So he's currently in what we call a bridge job. He's looking for that thing that he'll probably want to spend 5 or 10 years doing as a career or vocation or as his work. And he's working currently for a company that is a local business here that sells books, that also has a large variety of children's books. So they do a lot of book launches on particular books. And sometimes they need somebody to be the Gruffalo, or they need somebody to be the Cat in the Hat. Because when they do these book launches, they have these costumes that fly in, and they need somebody to be in those. And nobody else wanted to do it. And he tried it. And his empathy, his love for children, his soft heart, and his ability to be adaptable to what the need of the crowd would be, is giving him a chance to try on an identity that he wouldn't have been able to think about and know if he liked it or not. He had to literally put himself in the suit. And the last time I saw, he sent me a pic this week, and he's taken the Gruffalo's head off, and he's just beaming. He's just smiling because he's adding to the literacy of children. He's adding to the joy. He can be in this persona for a while. He's kind of an introvert, so nobody knows who he is, and he gets to hide behind this mask and interact in a very friendly way with kids. So I don't know if that helps, but having experiments and literally sinking your teeth into simulations, playing with things helps you know for me or not for me. Just like when you go to a smorgasbord and you take a dab of this and a dish of that and a spoonful of this, and you find out what you like. So you have to play with it. Another thing you can do is literally, we now know that we have complex neural networks in our heart, in our gut, in our head brain. So the heart and the gut, the enteric system, are now classified as functional brains. We also know through multiple brain integration and the neuroscience behind conversational intelligence that you can ask questions of your heart, of your gut, and of your head. So if you ever need to know if something's true for you or not, you have an inner plumb line. There are a couple of things about the plumb line. I think we talked last time about a set of core values that you can find out what those are and let those guide you instead of somebody else's agenda. But you can have a conversation with yourself, and here's how you set it up. You give yourself 2 minutes of just basic breathing because you want to bring yourself into a coherent state. You don't want to be too static. You don't want to have too much electricity going on in your body. You want your heart rate at a nice resting pace. You want your autonomic nervous system in a coherent sine wave instead of this scary up and down like a roller coaster or like a terrible stock market. You also don't want to be in freeze or numb out mode, which is like this baseline of flatline heart rate, and every once in a while there's a blip that says you're alive. So by breathing, literally, the word inspiration and the word aspiration come from the same Latin root of breath. So you breathe this life into yourself for a couple of minutes. You can feel your autonomic nervous system chilling out, getting very much in a peaceful, harmonious place where you can hear yourself think. And then you pull out a piece of paper and a pencil and you ask your heart, what's your connection? The heart is about connecting relationship and value. So you ask your heart, what does my heart want? What do I feel is right for me? Where is the value in these choices? What am I connected to? You ask these sorts of questions. Those words have been studied enough to know that they activate the 40,000 neurons that are beating in the heart. And you can study these things through multiple brain integration, MBIT, that comes out of Australia with Grant Suzalu, or you can also study what HeartMath, the Institute, tells us about the heart. And then once you have the heart's answers, go up to the head and ask something that puts you in the prefrontal cortex. Ask you to go into the future. And ask this third eye chakra that's in your forehead, that's right in front of the prefrontal cortex, what can you imagine for yourself happening in the future based on the choices that you have? And then drop back to the heart and see what the heart likes about that. And then ask yourself a gut question, an enteric question. What's your motivation? What part of your deep identity aligns with or misaligns with your choices? Where do you have courage to act? How come? These kinds of questions activate the enteric brain or the gut brain, which is about mobilization, preserving self-identity. The majority of our immune system is fed and developed in this gut system. So it's there to protect you. So you're going to have some questions about taking action or not taking action, deep identity, formulate a question or two, find out what the gut senses, and then send it back up to the heart and see what the heart can put together. Because the heart's sort of like a conductor, even though it has fewer neurons. It sort of is in between these two brains and can work as a conductor of the orchestra. And after a while, you'll just look at what you have written, and if you can't see a pattern in it that gives you the answer, hand it to a few trusted people that are nonpartisan, if you will, between the different choices, and let them tell you what they see in the pattern of your own words. Because we know through conversational intelligence and neuroscience that words are not things. Words are the representations and symbols you and I use every day to express the meaning, the processes, our thoughts, our intimations, our insights, our instincts, about what's going on, our inner neurochemistry, our inner world, where our chemicals and our physical, biological being blends with the spiritual or the soul. And that's where you can always find answers. Did that answer your question?
Yes. I really want to, I appreciate your answer even. I'm really glad that you talked about it and so thoroughly, because I think that all too often we get these blanket statements about goals and how to attain things, and there's a complete misrepresentation of finding out, first of all, how true that goal is for you, versus just, well, why not? You should just do it, and you're not doing it because you haven't attained it yet because you don't want it enough.
Yeah.
Instead of actually asking the question, is this desire true for me? And I've found, I really appreciate you taking time to really talk about getting to that space of authentic self-discussion, because I think there's a fair amount that once anxiety is in your life, or you're used to anxiety of running your life, it can be very difficult to then start to develop that skill set of learning to communicate with those centers.
Yes. And this is one reason that conversational intelligence is really doing a lot for us in neuroscience, and it blends with what Brené Brown's talking about in social science, and what Grant Suzalu and Suzanne Henwood are talking about from New Zealand and Australia about the multiple integration of these neural networks. Neural networks that are in our body, they have a job, and that is to listen and to communicate. So we have this inner wisdom, and we've known it. We have known this for years. How many times have you had somebody say, listen to your heart, follow your gut, use your head, which is really part of the context of how I started my TEDx talk. We know esoterically, or just through our language practices, that you'll hear people saying, they go, in my heart of hearts, I knew that wasn't the right decision. My gut was just telling me this was the right path for me, or my gut instinct said, don't go out with them tonight. Or I thought about this for a while and I just couldn't see my way through it, so I didn't do it. If you listen to our language, we're actually talking about how we already have this symphony of wisdom playing within us. And, here's something else too. If you've joined a club, if you've enlisted in the military, if you've taken on a job, if you've done something where you're like, gosh, this is not working out, chalk it up for experience. We don't find our way by thinking about it. We find our way by experimenting. Knowing the right answer is so much less interesting, inspiring, and effective than being willing to discover many right answers. So you can't figure it out. You have to play, experiment. It's what you did as a kid. You went over and visited your friend, and you could see their playroom was full of toys, and you could kind of tell what you liked or what you didn't like, but some things you have to try before you know if you enjoy it, just like the foods we talked about earlier. That way of learning is still a viable, very credible means for learning as an adult. And if something doesn't feel right to you, talk about it. Find somebody to talk about. Maybe you need a U-turn. Maybe you need to take a left or right turn. Maybe you need to just have a sabbatical leave. Maybe you need to finish something up, even though it's hard, for 2 months, 6 months, whatever your commitment is, and move on.
I think one of the interesting things too is that our tastes change over time.
True.
So we may love pickles as a kid, but then we reach a point where we're done and we're sick of it and we don't want them anymore. But then we try something else and and our palate has changed, and all of a sudden now sushi is the most amazing thing ever.
True, that's such a good point. And to that point, literally every cell in our body regenerates. The lining of our stomach is probably the fastest thing to regenerate. But if our cells are regenerating, we're really not the same person. In fact, I was speaking this morning at UVU, a local university here, and we talked about how deep identity and these possible selves that can be within us for reinvention or recalibration of what we do and how we live our lives, it's so fluid. And we live at a time where there's never been this kind of technology, this kind of social connection, this sort of chaos as well as opportunity. And so if you can look at it as in more of a holistic vantage point as this huge smorgasbord that just opened up, and realize that, yes, you're going to be really smart if you have more than one track in mind for a career. Because what you did today may become defunct tomorrow. And so if you can learn to regenerate, reinvent, recalibrate us in a cycle, you're going to be able to adapt. And this world needs people who can adapt. I mean, the climate change that I've experienced in my 60 years on this planet has been phenomenal and stunning and scary all at the same time, that I am convinced that the world that will be existing in the next 60 years, let's say 50, 40, 60 years left, I'm going to see even more changes. And everyone listening will see many, many changes. So being adaptable and being able to stay fluid and more in a flow zone instead of so rigid that there's only one right path, the should, could, and ought to really is dying. And what else can we discover? What are the other right answers? What else is possible are really opening up the doors for the future.
The military can get a bad rap for being too structured or rigid, but in reality, they talk a lot about adaptability. And even in the Air Force, they say all the time, adaptability is the key to air power. And all the time, things are changing. They shift, and you may have been working for one outcome, and then things change, and you have to completely shift. And you don't really have time to sit and complain or to whine or to be upset that it didn't come to fruition. You just have to keep moving with whatever is. So then my next question to you is, how important is a vision, or do you need to be, how do you construct a vision at that point as far as what you're reinventing in yourself or what you're creating? I've heard a lot of coaches talk about being minutely exact with your vision, but with what we're talking, if you have to have that adaptability, do you still have that clear of a vision?
Well, so I come at it this approach. I think each human being has a different sort of take on vision, or could have a different sort of take on vision. Vision is great to be able to see where you're going. And some of my greatest accomplishments, some of my most satisfying accomplishments, I sort of had a vision of what I was going for. I didn't always know the how, but I typically had the what and the why. But that's not necessary. Like, I just heard Liz Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, talking about the difference between a jackhammer and a hummingbird. And then an artist, a local artist here who creates jewelry out of coins from other countries, just really classy jewelry, say that was really helpful for her to hear Gilbert sort of justify the hummingbird's way. So if we even just have those two camps, some of us are going to be like jackhammers, and all we need is our lane to play in, because we can just chip away at the concrete, we can go after it, we can crush it, and just stay in our lane and do that job because we are a jackhammer. But then there are hummingbirds, and they flit from one thing to another, getting the nectar. And they may do one thing for a couple of years and then another thing for 5 years. And so vision is really, really helpful in knowing where you're going. But how you get to it and what you call it, like in the military, when you're given a mission, it doesn't last forever. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And you prepare for it like a project. And so some of us can have a mission that's temporary and for a season of our life. We can have an overarching purpose for our life. We can have a vision for some of the milestones we want. But there's a magic in not planning everything. I mean, we're sitting in my office, which is something that I saw years ago that I wanted. And it took years to get there. And I'm here, and some days I just pinch myself and say, yes, I wanted my commute to be like 2 minutes. And I wanted my office space to kind of look like this. And I wanted my books around me, and I wanted this wipe-off board. So I had a vision of these wants, but I also kept it loose. And I didn't just drive the jackhammer down to get to that. I played with having my office in a mezzanine at a local tea shop. And then I went out and rented some space. And eventually I found a home where I can have my home and my office in the same space. But what drew me to the space I wasn't looking for that. I found this garage where I could have this great gym. 1,000 square feet of garage space that you could put a gym in. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then, oh, by the way, look, here you could have your office, and here's where you could have your home. So I didn't hold so tightly to that vision. I let it be a dream of the heart, an aspiration. And so I used one part planning and vision and working, and another part of just letting the universe be my partner and bring me things that were better for me than I could have imagined. Because I was looking at warehouses, I was looking at new construction, I was looking at having a small office in Salt Lake and then a townhome in Daybreak or something. So when it came right down to it, the vision was a home office with the decor and the sort of architecture that I wanted inside, and it showed up. So there's also another thing about goals, and visions. 10% of goals, you're 10% closer to accomplishing a goal if you see somebody else doing it. Because sometimes we don't know what we want till we see someone trying. And I've worked with a pole dancer, a professional pole dancer, that did it for the art and the physicality and for competition. I don't think she's ever spent a day on a stage at, say, a gentleman's club. But she saw somebody do this, and with her gymnastic and dance class, she was like, I have to do that. I want to do that. I mean, that's one reason why I'm fencing now. I saw that. I experienced a little bit of and it became a goal of my own. So sometimes it's really good to have a vision and just drive for it, and other times it's good to have sort of a vision and let inspiration, the universe, Providence rise up and be your partner. And sometimes it's okay to not know and just keep discovering and being the hummingbird. Where is the sweetness in life? I also know somebody who recently just came to a realization, purpose of her life is not necessarily to leave a legacy, but as she transitions to whatever it is that comes on the other side of this life, that she's ready for it because she lived well here, but she doesn't have to leave a book. She doesn't have to leave intellectual property. She doesn't have to leave a statue. There doesn't have to be her name engraved on anything. She just wants to live her life well, so when she passes, she feels like she really completed the life well. So I feel like vision is useful. I feel like each person needs to decide how much and what does it look like. And again, it's that experimentation. Find out what your recipe is. And like you said, we change and grow. So what you wanted for yourself at a younger age may not be what you want when you're older. And we are living in a time of such great change that the chances of what you would want at age 25 will not be what you're going to be satisfied with at age 55. And in fact, I was listening to Peter Diamandis, who wrote the book Abundance, and he was saying that very shortly, 100 years old will be our new 60. So with that sort of in the back of your mind, if you're just starting out in life, or even if you're in midlife, realize that you're going to have a chance to be a totally different person with different ambitions and different aspirations and different desires and a different lifestyle later. You're going to have many different experiences with lifestyle, career, and vision within one life now. That answer your question?
Yeah. The very first guy I had on the podcast, he said he's in his late 70s and he says he's still figuring out what he's going to do with the rest of his life.
Yes.
But I want to say that from what I hear you saying, it sounds like your vision should be very open as far as like just knowing what piece of it is truly important to you, and then finding ways to act that then grow that or that are in harmony with that desire.
Yeah, and I have some blogs on the Soul Salt website. You can look through our blogs, and we talk a little bit about purpose. We talk a little bit about identity. Because just like the military, one of the strengths that I see in the military is the fact that they give you structure. And so you can go in and lean into that structure, and it kind of holds you in place while you explore other things in your life. So there's some things you don't have to worry about because the structure is handling that.
Yes.
And so there's some beauty and elegance in that. And so you can use that same sort of military example to find where you need some structure, be it a group or something that you join, and then allow yourself some fluidity. Some people will really want to go to these blogs and read them and say, okay, this is how I figure out my purpose, or this is how I figure out my vision, because that's what they need. 25% of the population is going to want to plan that much. But I'm telling you, there's another 25% that's going to be really happy to be sort of strategically minded and let things co-create with them as they go. And then there's another 25% that's going to be so driven that they're going to want to get results. And the thing they have to be cautious of is, are those the results you want long term? Because you're going to be driven for results, but then you have to ask your question, but are these the results that I really, really want? And another 25% will probably want to bring a lot of people with them and have a collaborative idea of what vision is, and be with other people that are like-minded about, do we have shared vision? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So are you saying then that how somebody proceeds is really based on their personality?
Well, so what I was referring to, Carl Jung did a lot of work, and some of his work is now in a standardized assessment you can take. It's called the DISC, D-I-S-C. It's really a social assessment that shows your social style, but what I have found is within that wiring, how you make meaning, where some of your strengths are, show up as well. So yes, it can determine how you consider what success is, how you define success, what muscles can you leverage for success with the DISC. And you can find some free DISC assessments, or you can always email me and say, hey, what assessment would you suggest if I wanted to pay for one? And we can give you suggestions. You just write to info@SoulSalt and say, which DISC assessment would you suggest I take? Here's what I want it for. But to that point, the DISC assessment is also based on the environment that you're in. So you could take it today and 3 years later, because you're in a different place in your life, show up totally differently. It's more standardized than the Myers-Briggs personality test. And yet I like it because it shows where the person is right now, sort of what's motivating them, what some of their strengths are, what's driving them, maybe where the shadow is that they need to be careful of. And it's really a good self-coaching tool to say, yeah, here's where I need to manage myself, and here's where I need to leverage my strengths. So we are so much more fluid than we know.
Yeah. So then it really becomes the act of learning how to navigate yourself and your own intricacies.
Yeah. And I would say, even those who are listening, decide what your own formula for success is. Like, how do you define success? I defined success several years ago and it seems to stick. But if it didn't, I change it. Mm-hmm. But back in my late 30s, I went through some cathartic experiences, and I decided at the end of my life, I'm going to determine how successful I am by how soft my heart has remained and how open my mind still is. Because I have realized that by staying malleable and learning and adapting, I'm going to be able, as we've talked, it's kind of a theme of this, then you can navigate the waters or the rocky road or whatever is coming before you.
So I had wanted to ask you what you would consider the most important habits of success are. And that now that we've had this conversation, I wonder if that's something that I guess that would be specific to you, and yet that wouldn't necessarily be the same for everybody.
It may not, if they define success differently, but we can go back to the constructs. If you want to have a sense of contentment, if you want to feel that formidable, badass self inside of you, be true to yourself, find those core values, leverage your strengths, and manage your focus. Those things I've found to be habits of the successful. But you can find a gazillion self-help books or blogs, and each person has a different recipe. So I do encourage people to find their own recipe. They can adopt mine. I've already done the work. I've tested it. My clients have tested it. Lean into it if it works for you, just like a nice recipe that you want to follow every time. If you like to, wing it when you're in the kitchen, then make up your own recipe each time. But yeah, habits of success sort of are dependent upon the way you define success. So start with your definition.
I've noticed that for myself, if I read or listen to a video and someone says something about, oh, you've got to wake up at this time and these are the steps that you do, if I try to implement that myself, It's almost like in Inception, the movie where they say that it's introduced from an outside,
right,
and the subject will immediately reject it. I find myself going into that kind of experience with it. However, it's not to say that I don't understand or appreciate the value of getting up early and having an effective morning and understand how that can work for my day. But if I do it because it's something I want to do, not because I think I need it for success.
It's different, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a much different experience.
Your motivation is coming from a different place. And I used to get up at 5:30 sharp every morning. That's my time. Now it's 6:30 to 6:45. And, you know, my past self would go, oh, wait, you're losing an hour. My current self is like, well, with the training I'm doing, with the workload that I have, with the book that I'm writing, with the relationships that are important to me, with the home life that I have, this is the new time. And I actually get, you know, closer to 8 hours instead of 7 hours of sleep. So, you know, we want to lean into other people and find their recipes, and I think that's useful. Take what works for you. At the end of the day, there's a big, massive part of the population, not everybody, but I would even guess maybe 75% of us that do better in building our own systems than taking somebody else's system and adapting it to us, or even adopting it wholeheartedly. We might adapt it easier than adopt it. So, you know, there's a lot to be said about self-efficacy and making your own decisions. And Simon Sinek, who wrote the book, and he has a TED Talk on the why, the importance of why. He has a new book coming out, and I got to read a piece of it, and part of it, in it, he said, business is a proposition of infinite rules of engagement. And I'm not saying it exactly as he said, but if you think about it, life itself is a proposition of infinite numbers of rules of proper engagement. If you're breaking down your rifle, there's one way to probably do that really, really well. There might be different sequences, but there's a way to do it really well. But if you're decomposing your life into pieces so you can reconstruct it, there are probably at least, and I think physics tells us this, maybe even quantum physics, there are at least 11 different choices in front of you. 11 doors you could walk through. I think there's an old movie called Sliding Door that you can watch that talks about this.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, but we do have that's potential, and once we choose one, the other doors close. There's power in choosing one. There's also power in not saying yes too soon. So I don't know if we're just wandering right now or what.
There's power in not saying yes too soon?
Yeah, if we lean back into the reflection of what we said earlier today, experimenting. You know, going to that smorgasbord and trying a few things and finding out what you're going to decide is your main...
Oh, right. Okay. So instead of like a massive commitment, maybe take a little time to play with the idea, try it on, almost like clothes, where you're like, how do I feel in this scenario or this situation?
Yeah.
And doing your research beforehand. Yeah.
And I wonder what's possible if we started approaching life like Johnny Nastor, who's a marketing consultant. You can find him on Hack the Entrepreneur or The Showrunner, a podcast for podcasters. Johnny has taught me in marketing that the thing I want to do with my company is repel people. All of us to have a nice living, all we need if we're in a service like mine are 1,000 true believers. Just 1,000. We don't have to be the next Brene Brown or the next Oprah Winfrey. Well, that's pretty encouraging, isn't it? That if you have a platform and you just need 1,000 really good followers, they can bring you the crowd that you need to make what you need. But that comes from being able to repel the people that are not right for you. Like one day somebody was hiring us for a government contract and they saw badass in our signature of our email and they said, we also see that on your website. That just won't fly. And we said, then we're sorry, we're not changing that. We're probably not your client. And we said no to a very lucrative proposition that we could have taken. But we needed to repel it because we would have had to change who we are. So if you look at life in the same way as how many things can I take from the smorgasbord, and you turn that on its head and say no, how many things can you be repelled by that you say no to? So when you sit down to the meal, it's extremely satisfying because you have a harmony and balance of what's really good for you for that one experience, then it's a far more enjoyable meal than having FOMO, the fear of what you're missing out on, by piling too much and then leaving uncomfortable and feeling like it's, a smorgasbord is a bad thing, when really it was you not being able to repel things that were not right for you. So I wonder what life is like instead of what are all my opportunities. What are the things I'm going to repel and say no to? So my true opportunities actually shine a little brighter.
Yeah. I have heard people talk about sometimes starting with the things that are no's for you. That can help pare down what your options are. That's interesting. I do think that we have kind of an innate wanting to receive validation from any source, and there's a capacity to want to appease people. So those kind of situations can be tricky.
Yep, they can. Yep. So if we get into appeasement, we're actually in the brain stem, and we're not thinking from high functions of the head brain. Because appeasement comes from the same place as the parasympathetic sort of response, appease and freeze, which is not, can help with survival, but it doesn't help with thriving sometimes.
It can help with survival, but it can't help with thriving. That makes a lot of sense to me. I've noticed that just talking with you, not only is it an interesting conversation, but I feel like you edify me personally. And I can tell that there's a piece of that in the way that you talk and that you've developed your communication skills. Is that something that you've learned to do purposefully as a coach?
So there's one part of it that is purposeful, where I've hired speaking coaches, I've taken classes, I've studied communication styles from various thinkers and thought leaders. But what I think is most important to point out is, and I may have mentioned this in the first interview, how I thought I was going to be an attorney.
Right.
And I was a debater. I paid attention to the fact that there was something that when I spoke, people noticed because I got the speaker points. So I interpreted that as I must go be an attorney because debate is argumentative, and if I'm good at that and I'm getting speaker points, of course I should be an attorney. But over time, what I found out was, especially meeting Judith E. Glaser, the woman who brought conversational intelligence to this planet, she channeled everything. By channeling, meaning she got information that she can't say she thought up. She would literally hear words whispered in her ear, and she would go look them up, and that would lead her in some of her research. So I know there's a certain part of me that when I'm using words and I'm using language, I'm alive. And people can hear it, and they can be edified. So I've built a platform. I was a teacher for 15 years, and I kept getting that reinforced. There's something here when you speak. I can be in a room. I was with a room of 300 people today. They were spread out in this huge convention center, hardly anybody up close to the stage, but it got so quiet. We were quietly breathing together for 2 minutes, really in a quiet space with 300 people that were interrupting their morning breakfast to come and listen to me. So their plates were sitting still with bagels and fruit, but here they were listening. And I know that doesn't come necessarily from the training. I know it comes from paying attention to where I get feedback when people say, I'd like to do it like you, or like you have said, I feel edified. Well, I know part of my purpose based on this strength is I came here to inspire and enlarge your vision of who you are and what you can achieve. I've learned that through experience, by experimentation, by getting people to hand me back information about where I do add value. Every single person listening adds value somewhere. And if you can find the right catalyst, the right people to reflect it back to you, you can pick up on it because you can feel it resonating within your soul when you're doing it. You may not believe it at first, but you can feel it as soon as you relent and say, I'm willing to accept this.
So that's really the magic of coming into the knowing of who you are,
yes,
or your essence.
Yes.
And you're saying that really the navigation of getting there is everything that we've been
talking about. Yeah.
So what about when you have a dream that's big or that's scary, and it is so scary to you that taking that action, you just hold yourself back on it?
That's where you need a team around you. Yeah, when I decided to take on triathlons, and I'd almost drowned as a child, and I had a fear of drowning, especially in open water. I mean, driving by a reservoir or open water would send the chills up my spine of, don't get near that, don't put your toe in that. And here I was going to be plunging in and swimming in a swarm of racers. I needed a team. And I had a goal. I had a vision. I'm going to beat this fear. Well, the first time I got in open water, and I had my coach right with me in the open water, and it was the first time I got in a wetsuit, and she was showing me how to swim, and I got going, and pretty soon I was fatigued. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm in the middle of this reservoir. I could drown. And I called out to her. I said, I need help. She says, now it's time to float. I said, I haven't learned that yet. So she just swam over to me and showed me how to float. Here I am laying in this reservoir, looking up at this huge sky, and I realized my fear is as big as that sky, as big and as wide as that sky. So I needed to change my vision, and I needed to refine what my goal was. I needed to have strategies and tools for getting out of the panic if I ever got into panic. I needed survival skills. So I started acquiring those. And I did get hit later on in another season in the head, lost my nose plugs, lost some other bits of consciousness, and got through the panic and didn't die in a triathlon. But that came because I scaled back my vision to what was really bare bones necessary. What wasn't realistic, it wasn't the should, could, and not to, it was what was necessary. So back to where you were starting this question, and I don't even know where you started. I'm so now in my own stuff with this reservoir experience. I feel like the message here is keep a vision, keep yourself open, find what you're good at, say your no's, but also be willing and humble enough to modify. And come back to your question. What was your question? Have I taken it so far off track?
No. You're good. I have to appreciate, I really like that you talked about developing survival skills, mm-hmm. and that it was really looking at it like, how do I develop the best survival skills for this situation? Mm-hmm. And I love that. No, and I was asking specifically about how you deal with coming up against that barrier. That barrier.
Yeah. So sometimes you modify. You have your team. You need a team. I had a running coach. I had somebody giving me the strength and endurance and building my training. I had the person who was working with me in the gym. I had somebody helping me pick out my bike. But I most in particular needed a coach to support me in the thing I was weakest in. Was never going to be the best. It wasn't going to turn into a strength. A weakness doesn't. So you mitigate. You get a team around you. Don't try to face off with your fears without somebody being on your side, an advocate, a coach, a team. None of us get through our greatest fears without having more than one person around us. And sometimes those are the people that plug us into the survival, and we downgrade our sense of thriving into I just need to survive this. I just need to be able to get through this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that you're talking about it that way, because I think about it as actual survival skills. My very first career in the military mm-hmm. was training air crew on survival and taking care of the survival equipment. So I'm taking it kind of in a literal sense. But what I love about it is that you're purposefully putting yourself into a situation where you then need those survival skills.
Right.
And I think that's really the piece of development as a person, where you don't just take those survival skills and say, okay, it's knowledge for me if I ever have to use it, but then you actually go, I want to try and apply this. I want to see myself apply it. I want to gain that confidence that comes from knowing I can apply it in the situation when it is necessary and needed.
Right. And to do what I did with the triathlons, I had this team, but I had a program. I leaned into the structure. We've talked about structure. I leaned into the structure, and I knew, Okay, I made the decision in January. My event's not till September. I have 9 months to learn how to swim in open water and survive. So I started with cannonballs because that's what my trainer said. And then I started with laps and learning to put my head under the water and breathe when I came up. So you probably, if it's really, really frightening, whatever it is that you want to conquer, you probably want to have a team and you want to have somebody write a program and follow it. I wasn't 100%. I was about 80, 90%. I knew my life depended upon following the guidelines, but I wasn't perfect. So getting somebody there to help you, maybe having somebody else outside yourself give you structure on how to deal with it. And also there's something to be said about our gut health, right? A lot of people don't pay attention to what we're eating. We don't pay attention to our gut health, our immune system. But if our gut is offline, we have no business facing our greatest fears because we don't have that inner resilience. We don't have the guts for it, literally. So make sure that your gut health is taken care of. That's probably, get your sleep, make sure your sleep hygiene is good, and then move to seeing what's going on with your gut. And get your nutrition, feed yourself well according to what your gut needs. If you need a probiotic, if you need to go to get tests, find out how to get your gut online because it's ludicrous in my mind to face your fears when you have really poor gut health.
That's amazing. I've never thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense to me. Perfect sense. I know we're running out of time. There is one other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly, and that's focus. Mm-hmm. I know you have an article about focus on your website as well, but I do see it as a fairly difficult or a common issue, definitely among the rising generations, right. and even in the older generations, just the way that society is programmed.
Right.
But what kind of advice or tools can you give the listeners as far as focus and developing focus?
Well, what I'm a proponent of, and this is what I sort of preach from the pulpit of Soul Salt, is if you manage your focus, your time and your energy will be devoted to the things that really matter to you. Instead of trying to manage time, manage focus. And so you do need to sequester time away from distractions to really get some of your most meaningful work done. You may have to do sprints with it instead of a marathon. You can have a timer, sequester yourself with maybe some Spotify music and just focus for a short amount of time on maybe a short list of what it is you need to do. Maybe you're writing down, maybe your job is to write all the months of the year and you need to do 5 years of that. Well, then do 1 year to start with. Bite-sized chunk work into spaces that you have where you can focus and then release that focus. I'm a proponent of having a daily planning system. That's why I have an app called Today and Not Today. It's just for visual thinkers to figure out, here are all my sticky notes and they're electronic, and then you can get it on the iPhone and you write down what you have and put it in a bucket. Is it really critical for today? No? Okay, then this other bucket will hold it. So doing some daily planning helps with the focus. Doing some long-term planning, whether weekly or monthly, and then having a way to manage your projects. There's a vision for what the project's about, there's all the decomposed parts, and there's a timeline. And those all three mean that you need to manage where you focus a little bit differently. So if you're checking in on a daily basis with what are the priorities, and you're doing some weekly and monthly planning so that the meetings and the regular scheduled stuff that you need can find a place in your schedule, in your calendar, and then you're starting to manage your projects. And I have a file folder for each of the projects that I just open up and see where I'm working, and I have project time already in my weeks and months. Then I can start chipping away at things. So it's more a matter of managing your focus away from distractions, having some systems to support you, and here's the key. Most people need to develop, this is a common thread in our discussion, develop their own system. So find ways to do your daily planning, find ways to do your weekly planning. Some people will need 3 systems for a year because they get bored with one, so they get just trade it out. Other people can use the same system once they developed it for a very, very long time. Create a system. How do you schedule? How do you manage your projects? How do you do your daily planning? When do you look out for the long vision for the week or the month or for the quarter? What things do you do quarterly? And when do you do them? And then hold yourself to that about 80%, trying to be, that's the mark. Can you be 80% on task with those things that you plan? But you can't be 100%. Life happens. So don't expect 100%. Give yourself a chance to go, well, I'm going to be 20% then, 30%. Work up to maybe something close to 60 or 80. But like everything else we talked about, you can customize. You can beg, borrow somebody else's system. For a small part of the population, maybe 20%, purchase one somebody's already figured out and just learn from them. But for 80% of us, we really do need to pick and choose from different ideas. And again, they may not all last a lifetime. So be willing to reinvent again. How's that?
Sounds great.
You have a theme going on.
Yes. No, I have to once again appreciate what you're saying. And I think, and I hear, I can just look at myself and notice that there's times that I've been using predetermined planning programs, and I go once again into that resistance, and I notice myself being like, I don't want to do this because it's like that inception where I immediately reject it because it's not mine. Yeah. But I can see if I approach it from a completely different aspect. And I love what you're saying about experimentation, because it's like, okay, well, what does a planning session look like that would be exciting to me?
Right.
What would be a fun planning session?
Right.
What do I need to do to make it something that I would be excited about engaging in? And then that creates what I've been looking for. Like, there's a reason why I haven't wanted to do it the way that it was predetermined. And honestly, who's to say that once I have some experience that I might just end up doing it the same way.
Right. But you need, instead of being told, you need to discover your way to it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So here's an offer. We haven't talked about this, but here's an offer, and we can put it in the show notes. I have an online course called Be Focused, where I appeal to the visual thinkers. And my whole deal in this course is to let people, here are the training wheels. Try these things, use these practices, and then start developing your own process, your own planning system that can have different components. And so it's just a starting point to get you started. And what we can do is I can talk to Shannon and see what kind of deep discount we can give to your listeners, and then you can put a coupon code in the show notes.
Awesome.
And for just your listeners, they can come in and get a discount if they're interested. Again, I'm not looking for everybody. I'm going to repel anybody who doesn't like the idea of why I'm offering this. But it's really for those people who, you kind of know you're a visual thinker. It's better if you can get your hands around, you want to build your own system, that excites you, then it's for you.
Lyn Christian, thank you again so much. Both interviews have been amazing. You're one of my new favorite people.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Oh, and one last thing.
Yeah.
I know last time you asked me, how could I possibly talk to the military? In my heart of hearts, I know I'm a warrior. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be doing the fencing that I do. I wouldn't be out there in the cause for fighting for other people's ability to see how bright and brilliant they are. So from one warrior to another, it's been a pleasure to talk to your audience.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and found a new mindset to help you excel. For more on Lyn Christian, visit www.soulsalt.com or www.tamfpodcast.com/soulsalt2. If you want to take advantage of her awesome online program with a 50% discount, just type in TAMF as a coupon code and use the link in the show notes.